Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our online policy dialogue, Geopolitical Turmoil in the South Caucasus, What Next? My name is Iana Maisuradze, and I am the Junior Policy Analyst of the Europe in the World program here at the European Policy Center. Thank you all for joining us today. With many developments taking place in the South Caucasus at a rapid pace and the balance of power of external actors shifting, the discussion we are going to have today aims to delve into the evolving geopolitical landscape and analyze the priorities and strategies of different actors, including the EU. We will address questions such as who is doing what in the South Caucasus and why, and what could be the implications, as well as how are the roles and policies of different external actors are having impact on the South Caucasus and in the geopolitical landscape, and what does the emergence of new external actors, particularly China and India, mean? We have an excellent panel with us today to discuss these issues. Stefan Meister, head of the Center for Order and Governance in Eastern Europe, Russia, and Central Asia from German Council for Foreign Relations, DGAP. Nigar Goksel, Project Director, Türkiye and International Crisis Group, Richard Giragosian, Founding Director at the Regional Studies Center, Fariz Ismailzade, Vice Rector at the ADA University and now Member of Parliament. Congratulations. And last but not least, Vano Chkhikvadze, EU Integration Program Manager at the Civil Society Foundation. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. Before I pass the floor to our first speaker, let me give some housekeeping rules. Our session today lasts for 1.5 hours, and I will start with a few opening questions to the speakers, and then we will engage in a conversation. Afterwards, I will open the digital floor to the audience for a question and answer session, and then we will wrap it up. You can ask questions in the chat or raise your hand, and I will ask my colleagues to bring you in. Please keep your questions or comments short, also in the chat, so that I can read them at a glance. So without further ado, let me turn to our panelists, and let me turn to you, Stefan, first, to have sort of kind of bigger picture and overview. Could you give us an overall assessment of the shifting role of big powers in the region and what this means and where the EU fits into this, especially given the new cycle in the institutions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this and also inviting me for this very timely discussion, and also really looking into the changes, geopolitical shifts, especially with Russia's large-scale war since 2022. And I think the South Caucasus is a region where you can see a lot of changes with this war. But I would say there are two major events which have changed the regional security order or security balance. And this is first the Second Karabakh War in 2020. And then it's the Russian large-scale invasion since 2022. Both have a major impact on the balance of power in the region and also in the engagement of other external actors. I would say, especially with the Russian large-scale war, we see the end of the Russian hegemony in the South Caucasus. Russia is not able anymore to keep the regional balance of power. And we can see, especially with Azerbaijan winning before the Second Karabakh War, but then also the push out of Karabakh Armenians from the region, and then also the withdrawal of Russian so-called peace forces from the region. We can see that Russia is making compromises also in the region and is adapting to this new reality. I think what we see is that third powers are more active. I think this Azerbaijani-Turkey engagement with the Second Karabakh War and afterwards is very important. And Turkey is more active also in the South Caucasus. But we can see also with weakening of Russia, Russia not providing anymore this kind of stability we had in the past. Iran is also more active in the region, and the EU. The EU has with the large-scale invasion has offered membership perspectives not only to Ukraine and Moldova but also to Georgia. It has engaged also in the negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and it has a monitoring mission, a civil monitoring mission in Armenia now. It's engaging increasingly also with Armenia in different sectors. They started the negotiations on a free visa agreement, travel agreement, and there are also other areas where we see more engagement of the EU. But I would say the main drivers of regional security are Azerbaijan and Turkey. I think we see that this kind of authoritarian stability we had in the past is over. I think we see also hedging strategies towards Russia particularly. But I think these two actors, they are the main drivers at the moment. What we also see is changing Russian interests in the South Caucasus. Russia needs new trade routes. It needs more connectivity. It wants to circumvent sanctions, and I think South Caucasus is here really crucial. It gives access also to Iran, which is an important partner for Russia in the war against Ukraine, and then further to India. The so-called North-South corridor, I think, is more important. And that means really more engagement also in other sectors than security in the region. And we also know that Russia is also meddling into domestic politics of some of the countries. I think what we also see is this re-emergence in a way of the 3+3 format. We will see what the Georgian Dream government decides after the election, also in terms of maybe even joining this format. But I think there is an interest of these regional powers, Russia, Turkey, Iran, to keep the West out of the region. And I think there is a push in this direction. And we see also China is trying to invest again in strategic infrastructure in the region. Anaklia, I think, is the main example. So there is also an interest to increase also transit routes to Europe or to other areas via the South Caucasus, and the same from the EU side. So we see this engagement with Central Asia. We see the increasing interest in investment in infrastructure also via the South Caucasus. So this so-called middle corridor. Turkey has definitely an interest into this. So I think also connectivity has become a key issue. And I think the war will in the end decide, so the war in Ukraine, how it will further progress, or the outcome of this war, what kind of capabilities Russia will have in the region, also in this region. And it's also then about the image of the US and the EU, I think this outcome, and also the attractiveness in the end of the EU in this region. So maybe I just stop here to talk not too long.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for this eagle's eye view, definitely, into the region, and also the external actors that are present in the region. So you mentioned Türkiye is enhancing its role in the region. And now let me turn to Nigar for her assessment about Türkiye's role in the region as it grows. What are its ambitions and priorities, and also what are Türkiye's challenges that it is facing in the region?
Thanks a lot. And Stefan already mentioned some of the things that I wanted to say, which is the sort of the recent changes that's created a context for Turkey to move up in the playing field in the Caucasus, be it Russian preoccupation in Ukraine or Turkey's role in the Second Karabakh War, supporting Azerbaijan. And I must say that while there were some expediting factors more recently, it's the groundwork that Turkey laid in the region actually goes back quite a while. So not with Armenia obviously, but with Georgia and Azerbaijan. Turkey was pursuing regional integration projects of very multifaceted relationship development, including the security dimension. And in the meantime, the West was also sort of not paying much attention. So the US was, at least particularly after the 90s, incrementally getting less present or having less resolve in the region, and the EU didn't necessarily step up. So there was also a void, coming up to 2020 that sets the grounds for what we see now. So what are Turkey's ambitions or priorities? I mean, obviously, the overarching aim is expanding regional influence and securing a sort of dominant role in the region. But how to get there, I think what Turkey is prioritizing is this regional connectivity and economic integration as a sort of strategy. And I think the assumption is that this kind of a connectivity web will naturally advantage Turkey, because compared to at least Russia and Iran, the assumption is Turkey's agile private sector, its location, its integration into global markets, that even if you give Russia or Iran a stake right now, the assumption is that if they don't play disruptive roles, if this is set up, that Turkey will be able to will have an advantage, let's say. So, and I guess unless you look at a very distant future when China and the EU might be able to elbow out Turkey if they come with an agenda as such, I think Turkey sees it more beneficial to prevent Iran or Russia from perceiving that they're being excluded enough to be able to set up these transport routes. Of course, every step that Turkey takes in the Caucasus isn't directly in line with its strategy, but I think that is their strategy. And then the two big pillars that the strategy has rested on, one of them, again, Stefan mentioned it, sort of the deep partnership with Azerbaijan as sort of a linchpin or a cornerstone for Turkey's regional ambitions, with the sort of middle corridor being the backbone. Azerbaijan, for many reasons, this was the case. Azerbaijan has money, it has hydrocarbons, it has key location, it has societal affinity, and it has a leadership that shares the same sort of strategic vision. So it was sort of almost inevitably the cornerstone of Turkey's strategy, also extending to the Central Asia. So I don't think we can look at just the Caucasus, but also see Azerbaijan from Turkey's perspective as a bridge to Central Asia and onwards to the rest of Asia as well. Cultivating Azerbaijan, good ties with Azerbaijan, just to add, is also important and beneficial for Turkish domestic politics. So ensuring Azerbaijan restored its sort of territorial integrity from Turkish perspective at every level was a bonus for the leadership in Ankara, despite the reputational and humanitarian costs that it brought from Armenians and the Western perspectives. In talking about connectivity, obviously, well, I guess we can talk about that later, but okay, I'll go on to the second pillar. The second pillar of Turkey's strategy of recent has been a sort of a variable management of Iran and Russia, trying to make sure that they don't disrupt Turkey's ambitions being pursued, and sort of giving them a sense that it's a win-win. So connectivity projects are win-win. They can be east-west, they can be south-north. 3+3, it's win-win. Everybody's included, nobody's excluded. And somewhat, I think it's at some level can be symbolic, just to give the message that everybody can benefit. I think it's also true, everybody can benefit, but I think Turkey's assumption is that Turkey will benefit more in the longer term. And Turkey's assumption is that Turkey benefiting more is going to be also in Western interests. But of course, it's not as straightforward as that. I think at some level, Tehran or Russia Tehran or Moscow might see Turkey's penetration as as being against their interests. And there are, even if Russia's preoccupied in Ukraine, and even if Iran is weak in many ways, they both have levers that they can use that would be retaliatory and disruptive. And this can be against Turkey. It can be in Idlib in Syria. It can be when it comes to Russia. It can be when it comes to Iran in Iraq. It can be with regard to trade. It can be asymmetric. I think, I don't think that Turkey writes off the possibility that if they step on the toes of those two countries, then life can get more difficult. So the consideration of managing those two countries, I think, and so far so good. I mean, also in Ukraine, we keep thinking this is, people keep saying Turkey can't hedge like this, but so far it's paid off in Ukraine, and we'll have to see how long it will be sustainable. I think Turkey somewhat has managed to pursue this line because it's not seen as the primary adversary by any one of these countries. For the West, it's not the primary adversary. For Russia, it's not, and for Iran, it's not. So as long as that continues, Turkey is able to take advantage of it. I mean, in terms of challenges, obviously normalizing its relations with Armenia is going to be very important for Turkey to fulfill its potential of regional cooperation and of development initiatives. I mean, the absence of functional relations with Armenia does hamper Turkey's potential in the region. It gives an edge to its rivals who can engage with all three countries. So as much as it's linked to the process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, I think what Turkey is looking to in the near future will be how to fold Armenia into its regional vision without disrupting again its relationship with other neighbors.
Thank you, Nigar, for sharing Turkey's priorities, challenges, ambitions, and you ended on the note about Armenia. So I think it would be great to hear from Richard about his views from Armenia, as well as regarding Turkey, but also about the recent statement that there might be a Russian-sponsored coup plot aimed at overthrowing Pashinyan's government and installing Kremlin-friendly leadership in Yerevan. So maybe you can share some insights on that as well, and also the influence that Russia continues to have in Armenia, and if there are still links between certain politicians and how this impacts the decision making. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question, and most importantly, thank you for organizing this event, and also appreciation to the 57 participants in this EPC discussion. But to start with a direct answer to your question, I think the sheer fact that I'm participating today means that Russia has failed in its supposed alleged coup attempt. To be quite honest, there is an underlying but pre-existing tension between Armenia and Russia that has little to do with Azerbaijan and much more related to the fact in 2018, Armenia witnessed a rare, successful, non-violent coming to power. That model of non-violent people power was a direct challenge to Putin's Moscow. And I do think from the very beginning of the Pashinyan government, there has been a degree of tension with Russia. This also has only been exacerbated by Russia's failure to meet expectations in Armenia of security obligations and commitments. And at the same time, what we see is Armenia is now committed to reasserting independence, strengthening sovereignty, especially in terms of pushing back and pushing against years of overdependence on Russia. For Armenia, Russia represents a very new challenge, and that is a challenge of an unreliable so-called partner. The second element of Armenia's post-war strategy is adapting to a difficult, painful post-war reality. Diplomatic negotiations with Azerbaijan, and as we've seen in the past week, we've just passed the one-year anniversary marking the successful Azerbaijani military campaign capturing Nagorno-Karabakh, driving out the Armenians from that enclave. What this means for the Armenian government is an acceptance of the terms imposed by Azerbaijan. Direct negotiations without either the EU or the Americans, but also without the Russians involved. This is actually now centered on the draft peace treaty negotiations, border demarcation, and the restoration of trade and transport connectivity. A second area of Armenian strategic priority is what we see happening in New York, a meeting between Turkish President Erdogan and the Armenian Prime Minister in the latest sign of the rare positive game changer, Armenia-Turkey normalization, reopening the border and connecting it to the broader context of restoring trade and transport. But the third element Armenia has is a contradictory sets of advantages and weaknesses. First, in terms of the advantage, Armenia has garnered demonstrable democratic credentials, 2 free and fair back-to-back elections, where the Armenian government was actually re-elected in early elections in 2021, despite losing the war. That was an achievement. Moreover, the Armenian side is endowed with a rare commodity of legitimacy, as well as stability, much more than its neighbors. But the disadvantage here is Armenia's position of weakness, not strength, of a degree of insecurity, not confidence. And I do think objectively there's no alternative but diplomatic negotiations. This is why personally I'm concerned about the dangerous 2 precedents from the war of 2020 that remain unchallenged. The first dangerous precedent was Azerbaijan's victory was very much a vindication of the use of force over diplomacy. And a second dangerous precedent was the Azerbaijani victories were also a validation of authoritarian power over democracy. These are dangerous precedents that undermine Western values. But turning back, as I began with Russia, I think the most demonstrable achievement is Armenia's success in forcing the withdrawal of Russian border guards from the Armenian International Airport, as well as the withdrawal of Russian border guards from 17 positions along the Armenian-Azerbaijani border. And finally, we are looking at a November planned deadline for at least concluding a framework of principles with Azerbaijan over an important new bilateral peace treaty. So let me stop here after this quick overview and now turn to the bad news from Georgia, probably.
Thank you, Richard, for the overview from Armenia. Let's turn to Georgia. Now we are expecting elections in Georgia in October, which will be a vitally important test to hold these upcoming parliamentary elections in accordance with the OSCE standards. So Vano, maybe you can tell us a bit about what is at stake in these elections. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Iana, and thanks to APC for putting this together. I'll try to be brief and to make some crucial points when it comes to the upcoming developments in Georgia. As you correctly mentioned, we're facing very tough and crucial times in our history, I would say, because the upcoming elections, which is going to take place on the 26th of October, would be one of the most important in our history, if not the most important, because that would rather define the trajectory of the country where it would head in next couple of years. When talking about that upcoming elections, I would say that there are like three main observations here. The first observation is that it's pretty much against vote, because the supporters of the GD are rather voting for GD to keep them in power in order to kind of avoid bring back the UNM. That's how most of them are portraying it. And when it comes to the those who are voting for opposition, they are pretty much voting because to oust the GD from the power. The second observation is that this election is very much dominated, and the debates are very much dominated on geopolitics and geopolitical issues, rather than on issues related to social economic development of the country. Considering this, both the opposition and the ruling party pretty much agree that this election is rather a referendum. But when it comes to the question of the referendum, that's where the difference is emerging. The ruling party, Georgian Dream, frames it as a referendum between the war and peace. And it tries to portray that GD is only guarantee of peace. And in case GD is losing the power, there will be a war in Georgia. And this is a strategy because GD is playing on the trauma of 2008 war and also the consequences of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And they are trying to portray as if Georgia has to choose between peace and the EU integration, whereas the opposition tries to frame the question of the referendum/election as a choice between West and Russia. So it's rather whether Georgia will continue its progress on EU integration and Euro-Atlantic integration, or it would become yet again Russia's backyard. Another observation is that according to the latest opinion polls, a large part of the society, I would say up to 40%, are pretty much undecided, and they still have to decide which party they are going to vote for. One of the crucial issues here is that the support, public support towards EU integration keeps to be very high. It had never dropped below the 60%, and now, according to the latest opinion poll, this is 80%. And I would say that this public support is the last bastion which keeps the GD to at least provide the lip service to the Georgia's EU integration process. On the field, as we know, European Union proposed Georgia 9 steps to deliver. And unfortunately, organizations like mine and others have been monitoring the process. And unfortunately, almost 1 year after these steps were proposed, none of them have been fulfilled. So, but despite that, considering that EU integration has a high support, GD keeps saying that this is a power which still will deliver on those. When it comes to the latest democratic development, unfortunately, what we have been witnessing in the last couple of months, it's a clear derail from the democratic track. The milestones of that was adopting of the Russian-style law, foreign agents law, which actually is going to totally shrink the space and annihilate the civil society organizations and critical media voices in Georgia. And the second one, just recently, it was adopted. I mean, the ruling party adopted so-called LGBTQI plus propaganda law, which very much attacks the minorities in the country. Overall, I would say that the upcoming election has a crucial importance because this is a chance for those 80% to prove once again that they are pro-European and they want EU integration. Because we all remember that back in December last year, when the European Union granted the candidate status to Georgia, it was said that this is given to the people. And that was actually given rather on a credit And now we have once again to demonstrate that Georgian society deserves that candidate status, and it also deserves to go forward. And what is also important is that all opposition parties, like those who are able and who will most probably overcome this threshold of 5%, are keen to deliver on those 9 steps, and they signed the Georgian charter, which actually provides all the, encourages everybody, all the political actors, to provide and deliver on 9 steps. So in almost like up to in 1 month's time, actually, we will decide whether Georgia will continue its stride towards the EU integration, or it will once again stay in this gray zone. I will stop here and would be happy to provide further info. Thank you.
Thank you, Vano, and for these insights about Georgia. We will definitely come back to these issues as well. But let's hear from Fariz about Azerbaijan. It was mentioned that Azerbaijan is one of the key drivers in the region. How do you see the evolving geopolitical landscape in the South Caucasus, or where do you see the role of Azerbaijan in this? Is it becoming a regional hegemon? Do you agree with this?
Thank you so much for the invitation. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to say that when the Second Karabakh War finished in 2020, and Azerbaijan was able to liberate its previously occupied territories, there was a vision that this will be the beginning of a new page in South Caucasus history, and Armenia and Azerbaijan can finally reconcile. They can sign a peace agreement, they can open the borders, they can trade, and there will be a regional integration. And I think this vision was actually quite a real vision. And there were some serious steps taken in that direction. For example, Azerbaijan was the first country to draft and propose to Armenia the peace plan, which is now the basis of peace negotiations, although 10 times the countries have revised it. And there were also some other agreements signed. The border demarcation started. The talks about Zangezur corridor, which is beneficial for both countries because it is connecting a railway system. But 4 years later, what we see is that we are moving away from that vision of peace, general peace in the South Caucasus, and we are entering a new arms race. We are entering a new stage of competition in which Armenia is trying to replace its military alliance with Russia, with some new military alliances, including with France, with India. In fact, India is now, I would say, a new player in the region. Then we see also some other support from certain European countries, from Canada. So eventually what is happening is that the peace is fading out, and Azerbaijan is quite, let's say, in a big concern, watching the new arms deliveries to Armenia, new appearance of new strategic alliances, the diplomatic pressure from France, the diplomatic, let's say, attacks from France. And I think that this is basically moving the region into a new confrontation, new divisions of spheres of influence. How Azerbaijan is responding? Azerbaijan is a relatively small country in the global scale. So if such big countries like India and France and Canada and others are somehow assisting Armenia militarily, it means that Azerbaijan has to look for new strategic alliances as well. And the first obvious strategic alliance is Türkiye and Turkic world. The Shusha Declaration was signed, and this is definitely bringing Azerbaijan into Turkish sphere of influence and Turkic world. But also, interestingly, Azerbaijan is now showing more interest in BRICS. It has also applied to upgrade its status in Shanghai Organization for Security. I think that these are very important developments. But basically, what is happening is that Armenia is becoming a favorite child of the West, and the West is providing all kind of support, military, and USAID is sponsoring a lot of activities, whereas Azerbaijan has to look for new alliances, new, let's say, safeguard zones. And in the long run, I think this will bring some new confrontation. Obviously, the rockets and the guns that are being supplied to Armenia, they will definitely need to be utilized at some point. So I think that what is happening is that countries like France are moving the region into a new era of confrontation instead of utilizing the chance for comprehensive regional peace, comprehensive regional stability, comprehensive integration, something at the model of 3+3. From Baku, it all looks very concerning. It looks like Armenia is not able to accept the results of the Second Karabakh War. And I think that from Baku, we see like Armenia is preparing for new confrontation and new, let's say, postponement of the possible peace agreement. I'll stop here. I think that's enough for now.
Thank you, Fariz. Let me stay with you for a bit before we go back to the other issues and other speakers. You mentioned the Zangezur corridor. What are the challenges to implement the corridor, and how and when do you see this moving forward? What about the other actors? Russia has positioned itself as a potential security guarantor of the route, while some Iranian experts have talked about the possibility of a military response by Tehran if the Zangezur corridor opens. You also mentioned the potential new allies and new alliances. So could you please elaborate a bit on this part as well?
Yes, actually, Azerbaijan has proposed Zangezur corridor as a beneficial project for Armenia itself, because technically speaking, Azerbaijan doesn't need access to Türkiye via Armenia. We have access to Türkiye via Georgia, and we have a railway connection. We have quite a good operational east-west corridor. So we don't need that as much as Armenia needs, because Armenia is blockaded from regional railway connections. It has no access to Central Asia, no access to Türkiye, no access to Iran as a railway connection. So Zangezur corridor was quite beneficial project as a win-win project. But unfortunately, over the past 4 years, it has become a hostage to attacks from radical parties, radical politicians, radical groups. And somehow Armenian society came to understand Zangezur corridor as a project which is risky project for the country. And instead of focusing on the benefits of the railway connection, Armenian society is focusing on some, let's say, unrealistic phobias, which are not very much grounded. And therefore, Armenia refuses to accept Zangezur corridor, refuses to open the corridor. And Iran is also, of course, opposing it very much, because Iran treats it as a security concern. And therefore, this seemingly beneficial project is hostage to very ungrounded phobias in both Armenian and Iranian societies.
Thank you, Fariz. And you also mentioned the new alliances. How do you see the role of the EU in the region, and particularly ties with Baku? How is progress towards finalizing the new partnership agreement beyond energy and priorities in the relations with the EU?
Well, if to say briefly, I think that EU, in particularly France, have really ruined the peace process by artificially pumping weapons into Armenia and pushing Armenia into more radical position on the negotiation table. So now I would say that what is happening is that EU and generally speaking West is just taking Armenia into its protection, sending a lot of weapons, sending a lot of dollars, and in that way kind of pushing Azerbaijan away from EU, pushing Azerbaijan into seeking new alliances. And I would say here, North-South corridor with Iran and Russia, the BRICS organization, Shanghai organization, very, very strong cooperation with Central Asian countries, 5+1, and general alliance within the Turkic Union. These are the kind of security architecture that Azerbaijan is looking forward.
Okay, thank you. And also, you mentioned a couple of times that Armenia hasn't accepted the results of the war. What do you think are the remaining obstacles to achieve a final peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia? Can an agreement by COP29, as previously suggested by Baku, be reached?
Well, I mean, the root of the basis for agreement is quite simple, that both countries should refrain from territorial claims on each other. And I don't think that you can say that in Armenian society, be it in the ruling party or opposition parties, certainly in Armenian diaspora, I mean, nobody wants to refuse from claims on Karabakh, on some areas of Türkiye. This is something that has been with Armenian nation for many decades. And this is just not acceptable in their society, that they can accept to give up the claims on Karabakh. And we can see it in constitution, if we see it in Declaration of Independence, we see it in statements of political parties, we see it in statements of, I mean, for 3 years, Armenia kept sending weapons to Karabakh, to the separatist regime. With these kind of conditions, you cannot achieve peace. So as long as this kind of attitude remains, then the peace will not be within the reach.
Thank you, Fariz. Let me turn to Richard. I'm sure he would like to respond to the statements. What are the main obstacles to reaching the peace agreement with Azerbaijan and Armenia, in your opinion?
Well, to be honest, I take no pleasure in responding because there are various points I disagree with. But I do think it's important to note the Armenian government is the best interlocutor the Azerbaijanis could hope for. And it's not just because of democratic credentials or legitimacy. The Armenian government is representing a much more realistic and difficult adaptation to the new post-war reality. And we see no embrace of any dreams of revenge or greater Armenia. Pashinyan's peace agenda has led to a number of opponents within Armenian society and the diaspora, but it is committed to a peace process directly talking to the Azerbaijani side that's bilateral in nature. None of these negotiations have anything to do with Nagorno-Karabakh, let alone the right of return, which has been an issue. For Armenia, the real breakthrough came in 2 areas. To the credit of both Azerbaijan and Armenia, there was a breakthrough agreement in April as a preliminary border demarcation agreement. This is actually reassuring in terms of addressing the need for border demarcation and delineation. And a second breakthrough agreement was regarding the restoration of road and rail. And its road is as important as railway connections here. And there was a concession by both sides on the location of these links, but also an end to any real demand for extraterritoriality. The sticking point now is in the operational details. And the fact that Russia is pursuing its policy to manage this restoration of trade and transport is more of a challenge for both sides. But going forward, I do think the Armenian government's desire to go to Baku in November for the COP summit, pledge and commit to general principles and a framework for a peace treaty is encouraging. I also think Azerbaijan has begun to climb down from its maximalist position since the April border demarcation agreement, which is also creating an environment more conducive. This is also why Turkey and Armenia have now re-engaged in diplomatic talks over normalization.
Thank you, Richard. I wanted to also ask you about the alliances. Armenia-EU relations continue to strengthen. What are the main priority areas for Armenia, and what are the challenges? Many people are talking about Armenia applying for EU membership. Is this likely anytime soon?
Well, I don't speak on behalf of the Armenian government. What I do speak in support of, however, is this policy of diversifying security partners. In other words, Armenia is looking to gain and garner a number of friends. India, of course, as Fariz has mentioned, is also very important, also because Pakistan is actively aligned with Azerbaijan. That's the Indian motivation. We also see, like Azerbaijan's relationship with Israel and Turkey, Armenia's deepening of ties with the West. In the security field, there is unprecedented EU engagement in Armenia in support of security. We see the deployment of EU monitors to Armenia, despite the fact that Armenia is still a host of a Russian military base. That is a surprising and unprecedented demonstration by the EU. And it's more about democracy than it is about the Armenian relationship with Russia. But at the same time, what we see is Armenia is pursuing a deepening or a pivot to the West, but not necessarily confronting or challenging Moscow on every issue. And unfortunately, Armenia still has very limited room to maneuver. But I do think overall, the future is much more in favor of a democratic, legitimate, stable Armenia than it is two countries with a father-to-son dynasty.
Thank you. Richard, for elaborating on the Armenian partnerships. Let me turn to Nigar about Turkey's engagement with the South Caucasus countries, and especially how do you assess the Turkey-Armenia relations? Can we expect a full normalization of ties soon, in particular the opening of the border? What are the main obstacles preventing this, and what would be the impact of the opening of the border?
So, in 2021, we saw the appointment of envoys to lead the normalization process between Turkey and Armenia. It's been very, let's say, moving slowly from time to time, standstill from time to time, chugging along. But there have been some noteworthy developments, like the resumption of flights, quite important, and some other CBMs that have been pursued. I think Ankara does want to normalize relations with Armenia, definitely, but there's a sort of constellation of stars that Ankara seems to be awaiting, and they're deliberately kept somewhat ambiguous, but they're very much linked to Armenia and Azerbaijan's track. And before the Second Karabakh War, again, there were different conditions, and they might not have been called conditions, but de facto conditions that Turkey held to as leveraged in return for the prospect of open borders with Armenia. At some point, it was that Armenia returned the rayons outside of Nagorno-Karabakh. Anyway, that's a historical background of that. After the Second Karabakh War, what Turkey hinged open borders to has not always been very clear to everyone involved. Sometimes it seemed to be a peace treaty being signed or agreement between Yerevan and Baku, sometimes more linked to the Zengezur corridor or transport route, whatever we want to call it. Sometimes the rhetoric, and I understand there are people that sit and try to decipher the rhetoric from Ankara because it can be contradictory. Sometimes Armenia is not inviting Western penetration into the region is articulated as a condition. Of course, there's the Azerbaijan sort of priorities are also Ankara's priorities when it comes to the sort of the two processes being linked to one another. I'll give you sort of the two different, because I can't, the Ankara, like I don't represent Ankara, but I'll give you two different perspectives that you can hear in Turkey from different people in Ankara, let's say. One is that time is of essence, and that the border needs to be opened as soon as possible. And I think there are both internal reasons in Armenia and external reasons that are cited for that. Some say that you don't want Armenian society to lose patience for moderate policies that would sort of leave the ground for more hawkish segments that Russia could also exploit, or other powers that are not very happy about Prime Minister Pashinyan's Western turn, or the prospect of Turkey's supposedly increasing leverage in the region if it normalizes. There can be lots of actors inside and outside who would take advantage of the sort of delay and the problems it causes. And that's sort of that's one aspect. And another is that the sort of the argument that if Turkey doesn't provide an economic lifeline to Armenia and a sense of security, then it's much more likely that Yerevan will turn to Western powers and invite them in, which is exactly what Ankara and Baku don't want. So that's the argument that's sort of in favor of we should hurry. And then there's another argument that you can hear from different people that that say that no, if you prematurely open the borders with Armenia, then you're in essence freezing the Karabakh problem again without sort of sealing the deal, and again you're leaving something sort of some kind of hopes among some segments in Armenia that can again be triggered by sparked by others, that then it's just another stage that this problem gets stuck in. And so along those lines, Azerbaijan and Armenia need to dot their I's and whatever their T's and have everything irreversibly agreed on before Turkey takes that step of opening the border. So you can hear both of these in Ankara. Yeah, I think maybe I'll leave it there in terms of the prospects of Turkey's normalizing soon. I think there is still hope. I don't know how realistic it is that if there's something very basic frameworky signed between Armenia and Azerbaijan before COP, then that can give Turkey an opportunity to take a significant step with Armenia, and sort of that will be the trigger of establishing diplomatic relations and opening the borders. I mean, so that, yeah, I think that hope is there. I don't know. I think maybe our friends from Armenia and Azerbaijan can better judge the real viability of that type of a step before COP. What kind of advantages would it have? I mean, there are many. I think the Imagine Center last year published a report on the effect for Turkish border regions, economic effect of opening the border, sort of the injection of sort of stimulation of the economy would be significant. Obviously, politically, it would be, I mean, by and large, right now, you don't really see any actors in Turkey being against the move. In the West, it would be a boost for Turkey's credibility. I don't know how much that matters right now, but it can't hurt, particularly in places like the US Congress. That would be useful. And I mean, I think, as I said sort of in the beginning, this whole vision of Turkey's open borders, regional stability is where Turkish regional integration sort of assets can flourish. I think doing that without folding Armenia in is going to be lopsided and not really as sturdy as Ankara would like.
Thank you, Nigar. And you also mentioned some external actors. How do you think Turkish engagement is viewed by Russia and Iran? And also, how do you view EU and US engagement in South Caucasus? Would it be beneficial to have more dialogue between the EU and Türkiye on the region?
Well, I guess, I mean, I guess people from Iran and from Russia would be a better judge of how Turkey is perceived. But some things I hear, I can share. I think Iran has some concerns about the sort of encirclement, And it's not just the so-called Sengiz transport route to Iran's north, but also to Iran's west. Turkey is involved in a project that would link the south of Iraq to Turkey, so another corridor that bypasses Iran. And so, even if Turkey has some problems with the West, it's still a NATO member. And so seeing that kind of infrastructure being laid obviously irks Iran to some degree, no matter whether Turkey in its messaging assures Iran that this is not going to be used against them. There's no guarantee of that when viewed from Tehran, and likewise in Moscow, I think there are some red lines that Moscow might have in mind and be communicating to Turkey about how much it can elbow out Moscow without consequences. About the EU and the US, I mean, until a certain stage, I don't know when, I guess in 2010 onwards, it may have started changing. Turkey was really seen as an extension of the West. It was pursuing policies as an extension of the West, as a bridge between the Caucasus and Europe. But increasingly, I think Turkey has seen who is the West for one, but of course the US disengagement, which we already talked about, and what is EU policy? I think there's questions about that in Ankara. If there was a unified EU policy, then it would be easier to talk about whether Ankara aligns with it or would benefit from cooperating more. I think the sort of view from Ankara is that bilateral, that with various EU countries, there can be shared interests and there can be leverages that are complementary, and probably it would be very useful for Turkey to join forces with them on a case basis, but sort of blanket alignment might not be within reach, also because France is different from I don't know, Germany, and obviously the UK is out. But so I think it's a little bit messy by virtue of the EU. I also think that, I mean, there's I hear more and more, some countries, particularly perhaps, I might hear this more in France, but there are some Western segments that, almost see Turkey's rising presence in the Caucasus as something that needs to be curbed. So there's, if Russia's power is diminishing and Turkey is filling in the void, that can also be seen as a threat for some Turkey skeptic segments that exist in various capitals. And so I think striking meaningful cooperation between the two, it would be beneficial when you think about China, for example, a longer term. I mean, Turkey can't compete. We look at Central Asia. Turkey can't compete with China on any economic grounds. But maybe if it joined forces with European countries or with the EU, it would stand more of a chance. And similarly, security-wise as well, Turkey very much relies on NATO for its technological defense advancement. I mean, it's not like a standalone power in very many ways. So I think Ankara's preference when it comes to cooperating with the EU would be sort of a soft counterbalance of Russia, instead of what Ankara would see as sort of unfeasible attempts to deal Russia out altogether or overnight. Maybe softer agenda items might make sense, so technical, logistical, financial, rather than political and military alignment in the region or acting together in the region. I think, but I'm not sure, that Ankara's preference would be more soft power related and more trying to take advantage of what the EU does better and see how it can complement what Turkey already has. It requires a little bit more nuanced thinking than I can do right now.
Thank you, Nigar, for this comprehensive overview of Turkish view. And let me turn to Vano. We talked about the players in the South Caucasus. Georgia is quite friendly with all of them, I would say. So what is the take from Georgia in terms of what is going on in the South Caucasus, and also about the external actors? I mean, Georgia is also it also has a Chinese investment in the country, and it's also EU candidate country status. So maybe you can tell us more.
Yeah, sure. Of course, I mean, we do follow what's happening there in the region, and I mean, the first and the foremost, it's because we know a lot about what is the cost of the peace. So it's first and the foremost that we are aspired for, of course, in the region. But at the same time, we very closely follow this shift that is taking place when it comes to the Armenia's foreign policy, and this like, you know, step by step rapprochement with the European Union, which gives some hopes and you know, the possibility that there might be at the end of the day another country from the South Caucasus which will start knocking pretty loudly on the EU's door. And of course, getting this visa liberalization action plan, which Armenia got recently, really is a step to that direction. At the same time, when it comes particularly to Georgia, I would say that thanks to the Georgian authorities, we do see the growing interest of China in our region, and that's somehow GD is trying to kind of, you know, balance the policy and engagement with, or disengagement with rather with the US and the European Union, with engagement with China. And in that regard, the main interest of China is related to the infrastructure, as we all see the highways which are they are built by the Chinese companies, by the way, with the European Union money, mostly. And at the same time, we see that Georgian government signed the strategic partnership agreement with China, which actually aims to boost the relations. And also there was an invitation that Chinese companies build the new airport in Tbilisi. But this relations between China and Georgia is pretty much unequal, as it was expected, because at the very moment when Georgia signed the strategic partnership deal with China, pretty soon after that, the UN resolution on the return of IDPs was passed at United Nations without support of China. So again, I mean, the Chinese intervention is there, just, you know, is seen from the GD to bring some money, which will kind of, you know, replace the funds coming from the European Union and US, because as we know, US is reviewing comprehensively the policy of engagement with Georgia, and this is a balance how GD is looking at this engagement.
Thank you, Vano. And also very quickly, if you can give us an assessment of the EU's response in the development, response in the developments in Georgia so far. Has it been effective? And if the elections are not held up to the OSCE standards in October, what do you think should be the reaction and response from the EU and US?
Well, definitely. I mean, as I said, these are the extremely crucial elections, and we all also see that the Georgian dream unfortunately crossed the red line, and that red line was this. This is the first ever government in our history that questioned the historical choice of the country to engage with Europe. None of the others had ever questioned it, basically, openly. And of course, it brings the consequences, and these are like individual sanctions, and that actually matters, and that actually has a kind of repercussion because it's painful, as we see, and these are like targeted not the people of the Georgia, but the individuals who are actually responsible for derailing of Georgia on the track of democracy, and especially grave violation of the human rights. When it comes to the elections, and if it is not conducted according to the ODIHR standards, I think that as we are hearing from Washington and also from Brussels, as well as from the capitals of the EU member states, we would see more and more sanctions coming. That would be individual sanctions, but also what we hear more and more from Brussels is that it might also put under the risk of visa-free travel, which is one of the biggest achievements of the Georgian society, and which it would actually pretty much heat and pretty much support this disengagement with the European Union. So I think that that's a crucial important. I mean, this is very important, and we have to kind of look at it very carefully, because it should not be like Georgian society should not be punished because of the leadership. And if there are sanctions, first of all, it should be targeted ones, and targeting those who are responsible for this derailing of the country.
Thank you, Vano, for these insights. And let me turn to Stefan about the European view. How would you assess or rather EU view? How would you assess geopolitical direction of the Caucasus, South Caucasus countries, as well as the shifting engagement and influence of the traditional external actors? Is the region teetering on the brink of a new geopolitical reality, and what would this mean for the EU?
Definitely, I think this is how we started also the whole discussion, that the region is changing fundamentally, and we have actors engaging in the region and also challenging in a way Russia, but also cooperating with Russia. I think it will be much more transactional, definitely in the South Caucasus. And I think also Karabakh, I think Richard mentioned this, I think we see also this end of liberal peace and the authoritarian way of solving conflicts, and also the use of force for doing this. So, and I think that's why we see an increasing EU engagement, also because of the lack of other actors like OSCE in the past, and multilateral institutions, that the EU is trying to get more active. I think the colleagues already described it. I think on one end, on Turkey, I would say there is a rethink. There will be a rethink on the EU-Turkey relations. It's also in Berlin here, and it's also in Brussels, that there is an understanding that Turkey is a key player in the South Caucasus, but also in the Black Sea region, on Ukraine, on Central Asia, on connectivity, on the Middle East. And the EU needs really a fundamental rethink also in how to engage and on what to engage also on Turkey, and what to focus with Turkey. And also the whole Armenia-Turkey issue, I think, is very much discussed, and it's also on the list of member states, but also in Brussels. So I think he is rather really a move, and it will come. It's still in making, but I think there will be a kind of a re-engagement also on other areas. I think on Georgia, it was already described. I think there's a focus on this election. It's a crucial election for the country. It's a kind of a decision also in which direction the country will move. I think we cannot expect a free and fair election, but if GD somehow manages and also wins in the end the election, I think there will be more an isolation policy from the EU side. It will be more difficult than from the US side to sanction GD people, or those who are maybe also then engaging in violence, engaging also in this policy of foreign agent law, LGBT law, and these kind of policies. So I think there's not a consensus, but it depends also how it will move after the election. But I'm also very skeptical about this isolation policy. I think it's important to keep the visa free for the society, and then target rather people in the elite with sanctions. And I think that's still in a discussion. But I think there will be a big change also in terms of funding, in terms of supporting the Georgian state. So I think that's a big issue. I think on Armenia, I would not overestimate the EU support for Armenia. I think it's a move with the monitoring mission, with the visa facilitation negotiations, with also some security cooperation. There will be also more funding, but there are no security guarantees. There's no really a bigger move to be a security actor in the region. okay, we see the support by France, which is a French initiative, not EU initiative, yeah. And I would also not overestimate this support. I think it's also by the Azeri colleagues a bit overplayed in a way, how it could shift the balance. I think there is definitely a balance of power towards the Azerbaijani side, yeah, which is very strong. But it has an impact, yeah. So, but we also see that Iran is tolerating this support because it's very skeptical about this corridor in the north. And I think we see also this from the EU side very skeptical approach of rapprochement between Russia and Azerbaijan. I think it's very obvious also in the gas sector. But also in the economic sector, we see also with BRICS, with SHOS. So I think there is a clearly move also from Baku towards more authoritarian countries. Also these huge repressions we have domestically in Azerbaijan now ahead of the COP, I think is really a stage of eliminating everything what is left over, yeah, from civil society, independent civil society and independent media, also against peace activists, this big move. So I think there is really a growing gap, yeah. So, and yeah, I don't know, I think just to finalize this, there will be a new policy of the EU. Eastern Partnership is somehow running out. There is this connectivity approach now, which will connect regions and different policy areas. There's a securitization also of different areas of EU policy. There will be more bilateralism, less region building from the EU side. And the South Caucasus is a key connecting region, yeah, with other regions, but it's also about the normative approach of the EU, and that will be also translated into the connectivity approach. Yeah, so but you also know about the domestic challenges in EU member states. You see how much there is more isolationist approach. We see this half-half engagement of the US in the region, which is more focused on Russia than on the region itself. So I think the West is not as strong maybe as it sometimes would like to look like, or it's described. I think there is a lack really of an adequate reaction to the importance of the region and to the challenge we see in the region from the European and from the US side. And that opens doors for other actors, for authoritarian actors. And I think that's maybe also the big challenge.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for this overview and also comprehensive analysis of the South Caucasus region, as well as the external actors interested in the region. Let me turn to our online audience and thank them for being so patient throughout our discussion. Let me ask a question and quote one of our audience members. Russia lost its leader's position in Southern Caucasus and continues losing impact on regional affairs, which is not what it likes happening. And we may well expect Russia to take effort, if not to restore, but to preserve its influence over the region in one way or another. In this context, what regional actions could we expect the Russians to take in foreseeable future, politically and economically in particular? Maybe we can start from Nigar.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, when it comes to sort of giving Turkey a warning that it should stop doing what it's doing, Russia's reaction might not necessarily be in the Caucasus. As I said before, Russia can support an assault of the Assad regime onto Idlib that would make Syrian refugees or Syrian people flee towards the Turkish border. A huge political and security problem for Turkey would unfold. Or when we saw, like when Turkey downed the Russian jet in 2015, the embargo on Turkish vegetables, one by one, the lifting of each one was very painful for the Turkish economy. I mean, there are a lot of levers that Russia can use to sort of keep Turkey, deliver Turkey a cost if Turkey is pursuing something that Moscow has expressed distaste for in the Caucasus. What Ankara thinks about what Russia can do in the region, I'm trying to draw on like some different things that I've heard. I mean, there's some people who think, of course, that Pashinyan can be targeted, that different groups within Armenia can be mobilized by Russia. They're easy to sort of create provocations, or even like, let's say the Turkey-Armenia border does open. Again, you can create provocations that create incidents and security problems. There's a lot of sort of asymmetrical actions that I think there are concerns that Moscow can pursue. With Azerbaijan, there's such a strong dialogue channel between Ankara and Baku at every level that it's harder to imagine that there would be a great misunderstanding that could get out of hand. But when it comes to something like an Ankara-Yerevan channel, it's so fragile as it is. One person talking to one person, or maybe not just that, a few people. That I think it's vulnerable to disruption, and with the sort of channels that Moscow has at every level, economic and political and whatnot. I think definitely there's a view that it's not going to happen against Russia's will for these types of reasons.
Thank you, Nigar. I think Stefan would like to comment on this as well.
Yes, since I'm still a Russia expert somehow, even if I'm not allowed anymore to travel to Russia. So I think Russia is weakened, but it's not weak. Yeah, so I think it's still a key actor in this region, and it's engaging also. We talked about the dependencies of Armenia from Russia. This is a long-term policy. It will be a very painful process also for Armenia to get more independent in different sectors from Russia. And we see also the growing ties between Azerbaijan and Russia, yeah, in some sectors, and also between Georgia and Russia. So I think Russia has other instruments also to impact. It's using also disinformation, hybrid instruments. It's using also it's energy, yeah, and other tools. And I think the issue with Russia is it's as a declining power, as a power which will lose more in the global competition also. It will be even more a disruptive power. It will use also different kind of disruptive instruments to for instance, to undermine European, EU influence or US influence in the region, to tie up with other authoritarian countries. And it will rather allow China to be more active in the South Caucasus than, for instance, the US or the EU to be more active there. So I think I don't talk here about authoritarian alliance. I think so I think that's maybe also part of it, but I think it's really a very transactional situation for the South Caucasus, and there's no dominant actor, and there is this experience of use of force, yeah. So, and I think that creates a danger also for doing it again, yeah, if you can do it. And I think we didn't mention, talked about the whole Middle East developments, I think, which also have an impact, what happens with Israel and Hamas, and beyond this. I think it's also part of the region in a way. It's also how Iran is impacted, yeah. And we see also this Iranian engagement in the region. So, and this is really the question: how will Russia interact with other actors? How it will bargain with other actors? What it will allow or will have to allow other actors to do in the region, and where it then also can spoil or undermine activities of other actors. And I think that's the instability we will see already, and we will further see in this region.
Thank you, Stefan. Fariz, would you like to add something to this assessment?
Yes, I wanted to briefly comment on what Stefan said, when he says that there is an authoritarian imposition of peace or something like that. Well, I would like to remind both of Stefan and also Richard that what has happened in 1992, 1993, when Azerbaijani territories were occupied and 1 million people were expelled from their homes, it was also not through peaceful means, but it was through use of violence. and through military means. So somehow when this was done to Azerbaijan, neither EU or no other international actors condemned Armenia, but this was much larger scale of humanitarian catastrophe. And 1 million of Azerbaijanis were left without their homes. And almost 20% of Azerbaijan's international recognized territories were looted, completely looted and ruined. So let's be consistent, let's be without double standards when we apply international law, and let's not pretend that what Armenia has done in 1990s was without violence or without use of force. But generally, I would like to once again focus on future and say that today Azerbaijan thinks that South Caucasus can be really place for regional peace and cooperation, unless countries like France can't continue pumping lots of weapons into Armenia and boosting and supporting revanchist ideas in Armenian political elite. So that's all I want to add at this point.
Thank you, Fariz. Richard, what would you think are the regional actions that we could expect from Russia in the foreseeable future, politically and economically?
Well, as you've heard, I think we all agree. Russia remains distracted, overwhelmed by its failed invasion of Ukraine, and it's a different challenge facing the chaos and unpredictability of a weak Russia. Moreover, I would say no matter what happens in Ukraine, we are expecting a storm on the horizon, an angry, vengeful Putin lashing out throughout the near abroad, including targeting many of our countries. But I do think there needs to be, in my opinion, a focus on EU engagement. Rather than US engagement, EU commitments and engagement is less provocative over the long run, but more effective. And since we're running out of time, I have 3 policy recommendations for the EU in the region. First is to display more of a determination, will and resolve. In other words, Putin succeeded in a very large degree in unifying the West. This Western resolve and commitment shouldn't be led by France or individual countries, but need to be EU-wide. The second, beyond determination, is defending democracy in preparation for the onslaught from Moscow. And the third recommendation is the necessity to demonstrate and regain deterrence. Deterrence was the most important casualty from the war of 2020. And we really need to regain that lost deterrence to prevent any renewed hostilities.
Thank you so much, Richard, for your recommendations as well. Vano, would you like to add something about what?
Just very briefly again, I just maybe will repeat myself, but again, as I said, now in Georgia, we are more inward looking, meaning like, again, the elections in less than 1 month will define a lot in our case, and it's not defining only the Georgia's fate, but it will also have an implication on the region. I have to say it's not just our only Georgia's future. And when it comes again, talking to the policy recommendations and advices, what I have to stress again that in case the US or the European Union is going to punish Georgia, not punish the Georgian people, there should be those who are actually taking Georgia away from the EU track. So that would be my suggestion, if I may.
Thank you, Vano, for your comments and for your policy recommendations. Nigar, would you have any policy recommendations, particularly for the EU, regarding the South Caucasus?
Yes, I mean, there's something that I think is important for the EU to keep in mind, and that is the very bitter experience Turkey had with regard to Cyprus, and the sort of the trauma of having Cyprus join the EU and then veto every integration prospect like the customs union, but whatever. I think that the fear that the EU is going to integrate little countries around Turkey also to its east and maybe appear to be working with Turkey, but then stab it in the back and take them in and leave out Turkey and Azerbaijan is a real perception in the country, and it drives. And that trust deficit is an important factor that needs to be overcome. You know, it can also be exacerbated by the view of sort of a religious bias. So, and you know, obviously the Gaza war has increased that as well. This sort of view that Europe is going to, or the EU is going to take in small Christian countries and block the rest, and you know, that, you know, to overcome that type of distrust, I think there needs to be a very multifaceted dialogue with Turkey. It's not just help us get stronger in the Caucasus, but a bigger package of cooperation and dialogue and trust building that of which the Caucasus would be only one of the pillars.
Thank you, Nigar. Fariz, would you have any policy recommendations?
Yes, I think that the policy recommendation would be that to focus on peace building instead of creating new divisions of divisions and spheres of influence. I think that that would be my first suggestion, that to focus on comprehensive peace in the South Caucasus instead of picking favorites and supporting these favorites. And the second suggestion would be to apply consistency and to treat all parties with equal, let's say, attitude and approach. Because, you know, when we had the refugee crisis, we didn't see so much interest from USAID, and now USAID suddenly sending millions to Armenia. The same with European Union. So as long as this kind of consistency and these inconsistencies or in double standards persist, then you will not be able to hope for public support for EU in Azerbaijan and in broader region, I would say.
Thank you, Fariz. Stefan, over to you about the policy recommendations.
So I think several things have been said. I think this re-engagement with Turkey, I think, is crucial, and also in different areas. It's not only focused on the South Caucasus. I think it's also about the credibility of the EU, the credibility of the enlargement process. I think is very important. The whole Ukraine issue will impact also on the region and on the image of the EU. So I think it's also crucial how we support Ukraine and in this war. I think I would also like to mention this. Then I think it's really about this connectivity approach something serious. Yeah, so it's not just a bubble like it was this resilience approach in the past, but really a serious policy in connecting regions, in connecting policies, and also connectivity as norm setting. Yeah, so it's not about just Asia and Europe, but it's also on the countries you connect in between. Yeah, we are now working on a new Black Sea strategy of the EU. It's also important for South Caucasus, for Caspian Sea and Central Asia. And also keep the door open for Georgia. I think Georgia is a key country. It's crucial not to close the door. Whatever happens with this election, it's important for the entire South Caucasus. And I would also say it's not only about the institutions and Brussels, this engagement. We know how the EU functions. So it's really important to have more ownership by member states, also of EU policy towards the South Caucasus and the other areas. So and there's not only France, there are also other member states. So I think also Germany needs on one point to take more leadership on other issues. There's a lack of leadership at the moment in the EU, and I think this is also seen in the South Caucasus. This is also seen in the peace process in the region. So I think we need a re-engagement also of countries like Germany in EU policies towards the South Caucasus.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Thank you, everyone, for your enriching thoughts and insights, as well as the policy recommendations. We have covered quite a ground during the past 90 minutes. We can say that there are definitely developments taking place in South Caucasus, which are rapid and which are shifting the balance of power. Also, we see new external actors in the region, and there is definitely an evolving geopolitical landscape. We see more engagement from China, from India, from Iran, and we definitely see that there is more room for EU and the US to engage in the region. So with this, I thank you very much for participating in our policy dialogue. EPC will continue to work on South Caucasus, and we look forward to hosting you again at EPC. Thank you also to our audience, and I wish you a nice afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Yeah. Bye-bye.